Hey, this is not our regularly scheduled time for Bible Q&A, but I just wanted to jump on real quick and post this question to the Catholic viewers in the Bible Q&A audience. I know that there are several in the Bible Q&A audience that are of the Catholic persuasion, and in light of what your pontiff has come out and said this week about capital punishment. That is, the Pope Francis, has come out and said that the church, meaning the Catholic Church, the church under his universal headship, he said that the church is in opposition to capital punishment, that capital punishment goes against the teachings of the church. Well, historically, that has not been true. Historically, the Catholic Church has not only taught that capital punishment is within the right of governments to execute, but the Catholic Church itself has used capital punishment, or let me qualify that. The Catholic Church has had trials of people that it has deemed heretics, at which point those heretics were then turned over to the secular authorities for execution. So the Catholic Church has used capital punishment against those that it deemed heretics. So historically, that has not been true. Biblically, that is not true. You know, capital punishment, the principle that there are things that a person can do, there are crimes that a person can commit that are deserving of death. And God has put that authority to execute capital punishment in the hands of the government. In Romans chapter 13, for example, there's that passage, Romans 13, 1 through 7, that says that the ruler does not bear the sword in vain. Well, that's the sword of wrath, the sword of capital punishment. The Apostle Paul said when he was on trial in Romans chapter 5 and beginning with verse 10, I'll begin reading. So Paul said, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judged. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you very well know. For if I am an offender, or have, now notice what he says here, or have committed anything deserving of death, I do not object to dying. As Paul recognized the biblical principle, the universal principle in all three dispensations, patriarchal, Mosaic, Christian, the principle of capital punishment, the principle of there being crimes, that if a person commits those crimes, that person, as Paul puts it here, is deserving of death. All the way back in Genesis, God told Moses that anyone who sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. So God instituted the principle of capital punishment. Under the law of Moses, you had that avenger of blood, where the avenger of blood was authorized under his government, under the law that he lived, to go and execute vengeance on someone who had killed a close relative. That's what the avenger of blood was. The avenger of blood was a close relative who was authorized by the government to go and execute, that is, carry out capital punishment on the one that had killed their close relative. That's what the cities of refuge were for. The cities of refuge were for people who had killed someone accidentally to go for safety from the avenger of blood. The avenger of blood couldn't go into the city of refuge to get that person until such time as the priests were able to rule in the case. And if the priest found that it actually was a premeditated murder, that it wasn't actually an accidental homicide, then they would put that person out of the city of refuge, and the avenger of blood could then execute wrath on them. Well, we come to the New Testament, Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 7. there's that principle of capital punishment. Once again, the Apostle Paul, where I just read, recognized the authority of the government to carry out capital punishment. Jesus himself said to Pilate, when Pilate said to Jesus, "Do you not know that I have power to execute or power to free?" And Jesus said, "You would not have that authority. You would not have that power, lest it was given to you by my Father." Jesus recognized the authority of the civil government to carry out capital punishment. Jesus recognized it. Paul recognized it. Paul wrote it in the gospel to be subject to the governing authorities because they bear the sword of vengeance. They can carry out capital punishment. So now, to the Catholic viewers in the audience, the Pope has come out and said that capital punishment is contrary to the teachings of the church, or the church has to be opposed to capital punishment. So what about all of those years of teaching up to now? And this is one of the dilemmas that I point out regularly about the Catholic Church, is that when you put your authority in a man, and you say that this man is the vicar of God on earth, in other words, he speaks for God, well then when Pope Francis comes out and says that capital punishment is against the teachings of the church has to oppose capital punishment, even though throughout the history of the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church has recognized and utilized capital punishment. So now what do you do? What do you now say that all of those years of tradition, which you appeal to, very heavily, all of those years of tradition, all of those years of teaching, that now you just throw those out the window and you go with what the current Pope says? Well, when you recognize that the authority is in the Scriptures, it's not in a man, it's not in the church, it's in the Scriptures. Well, you don't have problems like that. If somebody starts teaching something that doesn't line up with the Scriptures, well, then you tell that person that they're not teaching the truth. You mark them as a false teacher. You put them out. So I'm just wondering if there's going to be any ramifications within the ranks of the Catholic Church over this reversal of long-held teaching in the Catholic Church. What do you do? Do you disagree with the Pope and say, well, no, the Pope is wrong? I heard one commentator, and I believe he's a Catholic, say the Pope is wrong. Well, how does a Catholic who believes that the Pope speaks for God then turn around and say, well, the Pope is wrong? And he even said that the Pope said this as the doctrine of the church, but it's not the doctrine of the church, it's his personal opinion. And he basically charged the Pope with instituting his personal opinion about capital punishment as church doctrine. Well, how can a Catholic believe that the Pope could do that? Doesn't the Pope speak for God on earth? Isn't he the vicar of God on earth? And so if the Pope says that capital punishment is wrong, that now every Catholic has to now say that capital punishment is wrong, and if not, why not? Because he didn't say it as this is my opinion about capital punishment. He said that capital punishment is contrary to the church. The church has to oppose capital punishment. What would happen if the Pope came out tomorrow and said that that the church is now going to recognize the validity of alternative lifestyles, homosexuality, same-sex marriage, transgender, all of these things, that now the Catholic Church, it is the doctrine of the church that we're going to recognize the validity of what is called alternative lifestyles? What are you going to do? You either have to say, well, he's speaking for God. He is the head of the church. He is the one who institutes the doctrine of the church, and so we have to agree with it. What will you do now? You may think about this, reversal on the principle of capital punishment in the Catholic Church as kind of insignificant because states are going to do what states do, but if you're a Catholic in that state, don't you have to now vote against capital punishment? Don't you have to work in that state to change the state laws to get rid of capital punishment in that state, even though the biblical teaching and the tradition of the Catholic Church throughout history has been to endorse capital punishment, to recognize, as I said, the Catholic Church not only recognize the validity of capital punishment, but utilize capital punishment in the past. So now what do you do if the Pope comes out tomorrow and says, this stance that we've taken against abortion, it's really a woman's right to choose, and so we need to stop trying to shame people out of getting an abortion and recognize that person's right to choose. The Catholic Church is no longer going to stand in opposition to abortion. Well, and that would be a tragedy, because even though you know very well that I teach strongly that the Catholic Church is not the true New Testament church. The Catholic Church is not the church of the Bible. The fact is that the Catholic Church is the largest, I guess, I don't know, for lack of a better classification, denomination in Christendom. And so to lose the Catholic Church's opposition to abortion would be a horrible tragedy in the fight for the right to life. But you being a Catholic, what would you do? Would you have to say, well, our pontiff, the head of our church, has said that we have to recognize the validity of the right to choose. You have to recognize the validity of alternative lifestyles. Are you saying today, after the Pope has come out and reversed the church's, and when I say the church in this context, I'm talking about the Catholic Church, has reversed the church's position on capital punishment, are you now saying today, well, then we have to oppose capital punishment because our pontiff, the head of the church on earth, has said we have to oppose capital punishment? Is that what you're going to do? Well, if you were to do what you should do, you would recognize that that's not the way the church is supposed to work. The church is supposed to be autonomous in every location. That's why you read in the Bible about each church having its own elders under the headship of Christ. Christ is the universal head of the church, not a man on earth. And elders in local congregations serve under the headship of Christ to oversee that local congregation. And their authority does not extend beyond that local congregation. So that if a congregation, like sadly many do, deviate from the Bible, it doesn't affect the rest of the church, it just affects that congregation. So now what are you going to do? Are you going to now begin opposing capital punishment even though for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years you have been taught that capital punishment is a biblical principle, is a principle of the Catholic Church that should be upheld? Or now are you going to flip on that because your current Pope has flipped on that? And if you'll flip on that, what else will you flip on? Well, that's just a question I wanted to put out there. Post your comments and your feedback in the comment section below. Be sure, if you're not a subscriber, subscribe and click the notification bell so you'll see when we go live. And I may drop some questions like this one in between our Monday night live stream. So post your questions and comments for this Monday night's discussion on Bible Q&A. Thanks for watching.